Picture this. You are in a cramped, smoky London rhythm and blues club in the early 1960s.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, the music on stage is totally frantic, the energy is dangerously high, and suddenly the drummer just hurls himself at the bass player.
Right.
And not to yell at him or, hit him with a drumstick, he literally attacks him with a knife.
It is a genuinely terrifying moment.
Yeah.
I mean, the truly crazy part is that this wasn't the violent end of a musical partnership.
No, not at all.
That was just the prequel.
Exactly. That was Ginger Baker and Jack Bruce during their days in the Graham Bond organization.
Okay.
Which is basically a band characterized by explosive interpersonal animosity.
To put it mildly.
Right. So when you drop into the reality of Cream's live shows just a couple of years later, you are not witnessing a collaborative musical endeavor. You are witnessing acts of absolute sonic warfare.
Oh, absolutely. It was combat conducted entirely through amplification. You had on-stage sabotage on a nightly basis. I mean, Ginger Baker, who was infuriated by Jack Bruce's really busy playing style, would actually hurl his heavy drumsticks at Bruce's head mid-song.
Which is insane. And Bruce would retaliate by turning around and literally using his solid mahogany bass guitar to physically demolish Baker's drum kit.
While they're playing.
Right. And while this is happening, the three of them are engaging in these deafening volume wars. Bruce and the guitarist, Eric Clapton, would just keep turning their massive amplifiers up to the absolute maximum limit.
Just to drown each other out.
Simply to drown each other out, yeah.
Which, left Baker, who wasn't amplified at all, having to strike his drums with maximum physical violence just to even be heard over the roaring amplifiers.
Meanwhile, Clapton is just, hiding?
Pretty much. Clapton hated confrontation, so he essentially hid in the corner of the stage. He acted as this passive, exhausted peacemaker, while his bandmates literally tried to sonically destroy one another.
But, here's the massive paradox. We can debate this all day. But that toxic hostility, combined with an absolute lack of any clear band leader, ironically served as the combustible engine that drove their legendary 20-minute improvisations.
It really did.
The sheer unadulterated hatred pushed them to play at the absolute bleeding edge of their physical and mental limits. Welcome to Deep Cuts and Deep Thinking.
It really is a fascinating psychological dynamic to unpack.
Today we are pulling from a huge stack of historical records, musicological breakdowns, and production logs to explore this volatile 2-year anomaly of Cream.
Right, from 1966 to 1968.
Exactly. We're going to unpack how this incredibly toxic power trio inadvertently created the physical architecture for hard rock, how they forever changed the live concert economy, and, how they ultimately collapsed under the immense weight of their own egos.
So to understand why three musicians who actively despised each other would ever form a band in the first place, you really have to look at the highly segregated subcultures of the mid-1960s London music scene.
Right, because it was a collision of entirely different worlds.
Right.
Take Eric Clapton, for instance.
Right.
He was on this ruthless pursuit of blues purity. He was actually in the Yardbirds, but the moment they recorded the commercial pop hit For Your Love, he just quit.
Yeah, he felt it was a complete betrayal of the blues.
So he joined John Mayall's Blues Breakers to play strict academic Chicago blues.
Which is what led to that legendary Clapton is God graffiti in the Islington station.
Oh, right. Big graffiti?
Yeah, though looking at the historical records, there is a very credible theory that this wasn't actually spontaneous fan hysteria at all.
Wait, really? It wasn't real?
Well, it was likely a calculated PR stunt orchestrated by a promoter named Hamish Grimes to build Clapton's mythos.
Wow, okay.
But the point stands, Clapton was viewed as a blues deity at that time.
Right, and while Clapton is being deified in the blues clubs, Jack Bruce is coming from a completely different intellectual space. I mean, Bruce was not your standard rock bass player.
Not even close.
He was a scholarship student at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama. He was formally trained on the classical cello.
And that background is crucial. When Bruce picked up the electric bass guitar, he brought the contrapuntal theories and voice leading of Johann Sebastian Bach directly into rock music.
Which was unheard of.
Completely.
Yeah.
For anyone wondering what that sounds like in practice, instead of just plucking the root note of a chord over and over to anchor the rhythm like a standard player, Bruce was playing a completely independent, wandering melody.
Like a secondary song.
Exactly. It was a secondary song happening right underneath the main vocal, perfectly harmonized but moving in its own distinct direction.
Okay, and then you have Ginger Baker, who had this elite jazz pedigree. I mean, he was mentored by Phil Seaman, who was a premier British jazz drummer.
Yeah.
Baker brought these really complex West African polyrhythms and syncopated triplet figures to his drum kit.
Right. And to put that in perspective, imagine your hands playing in one-time signature, like a waltz, while your feet are playing in a totally different driving tempo.
That sounds impossible.
It is incredibly difficult. It creates this rolling, circular feel instead of a rigid military-style march. Baker actually actively despised the standard rock and roll backbeat. He thought it was musically primitive.
So the formation of Cream is just wild then. Baker wants a new trio to escape the drug-fueled wreckage of the Graham Bond organization. He asks Clapton.
And Clapton agrees, but issues one non-negotiable demand.
Right, Jack Bruce has to be the bass player.
Which is incredible because when Clapton suggests this, Baker is so overcome with rage at the mere mention of Bruce's name that he almost crashes his car.
He literally almost crashes his car.
Yeah, but Baker capitulates. He swallows his hatred because he desperately needs Clapton's massive star power to make the band commercially viable.
Okay, let's unpack this. It's like locking a classical composer, an African jazz rhythm scholar, and an absolute blues purist in a tiny room turning out the lights and telling them to fight their way out.
That is a perfect analogy.
But practically speaking, if I'm playing a standard rock gig without a rhythm guitarist, the moment the lead player takes a solo, the bottom basically drops out of the sound. It gets incredibly thin and empty. How did this specific trio avoid that?
Well, they avoided it by redefining the entire physical architecture of the power trio.
How so?
Because there was no rhythm guitar to provide that warm harmonic cushion, everyone had to overcompensate massively. As we mentioned with the back influence, Bruce couldn't just play simple root notes.
Right.
He essentially treated the bass as a second lead instrument. And Baker couldn't just keep time. He had to play the entire drum kit continuously to fill the percussive space.
Leaving Clapton to do everything else.
Exactly. Clapton had to synthesize rhythm chords and lead guitar lines into one massive overdriven wall of sound.
And to physically fill that sonic space, they pushed late 1960s audio technology to its absolute breaking point, didn't they?
Oh, they broke it.
Clapton developed what became known as his woman tone. He used a 1964 Gibson SG, which, by the way, was famously hand-painted with psychedelic colors by the art collective known as The Fool. And the mechanics of this tone are fascinating. He would roll the tone knobs on the guitar all the way down to 0, completely killing the high piercing frequencies.
Right.
Then he would plug into these massive 100-watt Marshall Super Lead amplifiers.
And he would crank every single dial on the amplifier to 10.
Just maxed out.
Everything maxed. What this did acoustically is astonishing. It forced the Celestion greenback speakers inside the cabinets into physical distortion.
So the speakers were actually failing.
Basically, yeah. The paper cones of the speakers were buckling under the mechanical stress of those sound waves. Because the high frequencies were rolled off, that buckling created a thick, vocal, crying sustain that sounded almost like a human voice weeping.
Wow. And Bruce was doing something just as extreme to make sure his bass wasn't swallowed up by that wall of sound.
He had to.
He used a short-scale Gibson EB3, customized by luthier Dan Armstrong. And the pickup on this instrument was wound so hot, it actually earned the nickname the Mudbucker.
The Mudbucker, yeah.
It produced an incredibly dark, aggressive growl. But to really compete with Clapton's Marshalls, Bruce eventually moved to the acoustic 360 system.
Which is a beast of a rig.
It wasn't a normal amplifier at all, right?
Yeah.
It was a folded horn cabinet.
Yeah, the acoustic engineering on that cabinet is brilliant. You see, low bass frequencies are massive, long sound waves.
Right.
If you just push them out of a standard speaker, they disperse and lose their punch quickly. The acoustic 360 featured a backward-facing 18-inch speaker.
I mean, backward-facing.
Backward-facing. It fired backward into a W-shaped acoustic chamber inside the wooden box. That chamber essentially folded the sound waves, allowing them to fully mature before exiting the cabinet.
That is wild.
It acted as a physical megaphone, basically projecting low, clean bass frequencies over immense distances. It turned Bruce's bass into a roaring baritone voice.
So Baker definitely wasn't going to be left behind in this arms race either.
Definitely not.
He played a custom Ludwig Silver Sparkle kit featuring asymmetrical dual bass drums. He had a 20-inch bass drum for his right foot and a 22-inch bass drum for his left foot.
Which is a total masterstroke in acoustic masking.
How does that work?
Well, by having two different physical sizes, he could tune them a musical third or fourth apart. When drummers play rapid double kick patterns on identical drums, the frequencies often blur together into this muddy, low rumble.
Oh, okay.
Because Baker's drums had distinct pitches, you could hear every single strike clearly. Combine that with a high-tension leady Broadway snare drum tuned so tightly it cracked like a rifle shot right through those Marshall amps.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because, we tend to romanticize this extreme rock volume as a pure artistic choice.
Right, like it was a rebellion.
Exactly, this grand rebellion against the musical establishment. But if we look at the historical context, weren't they forced to play incredibly loud and take these agonizingly long solos simply because of the grueling economics of the London club circuit?
What's fascinating here is it is a prime example of necessity driving invention. Venues like the Marquee Club didn't book acts for tight 45-minute showcases.
Yeah.
They demanded that bands play multi-set shows that lasted for hours, and Cream only had a very limited repertoire of short pop singles.
Right.
To stretch their set list and survive the night without repeating themselves, they were physically forced to improvise.
And playing loudly was just a survival tactic in those specific rooms.
Precisely. In these small, acoustically untreated clubs filled with hundreds of shouting, drinking people, extreme volume wasn't an artistic statement.
It was spatial dominance.
It was spatial dominance. It was the only way to overpower the ambient noise of the crowd and establish total authority over the room.
So on stage, they are effectively weaponizing volume to survive these brutal club gigs. It is unscripted chaos.
Yeah.
But you obviously cannot put a deafening 20-minute volume war on AM radio.
No, absolutely not.
So how do these feral musicians suddenly produce incredibly tight, pristine, 3-minute psychedelic pop hits?
They needed severe discipline, and they found it through brilliant, unsung mediators.
Like who?
Well, it started with their manager, Robert Stigwood. He completely bypassed the cheap, low-margin package tours that most British beat bands were doing.
Okay.
He treated Cream as a premium underground art act. He struck a deal with Atlantic Records in the United States, which paired the band with record executive Ahmet Ertegun and the legendary audio engineer Tom Dowd.
Oh, Tom Dowd is a fascinating figure. This is a man who worked on the Manhattan Project.
Yes, literally a nuclear physicist.
Right. He understood the fundamental physics of sound waves better than almost anyone in the music industry.
Right.
He wasn't just twisting knobs, he was applying high-level acoustic theory to a rock band. This team brought a level of discipline that was desperately needed. Take the recording of their album, Disraeli Gears. They tracked that entire masterpiece in just 5 days in New York City because their work visas were about to expire.
It's crazy. But the man who really held the whip in the studio was producer Felix Pappalardi.
Right, Pappalardi.
He exerted absolute control. He forced the use of heavy audio compression. Think of compression like putting an invisible audio ceiling over the band.
So they couldn't just get louder and louder.
Exactly. Whenever their volume spiked out of control, the machinery squashed the sound down, forcing their wild dynamics into a tight, cohesive, radio-friendly package.
Wow.
Pappalardi ruthlessly edited their sprawling jams. He even overdubbed classical instruments like violas and glockenspiels to give their tracks a sophisticated, psychedelic sheen.
The creation of their biggest hit, Sunshine of Your Love, perfectly captures this studio intervention, I think. Jack Bruce wrote that famous descending heavy riff after attending a Jimi Hendrix concert.
Such a heavy riff.
Yeah, but in the studio, the band was struggling. They just couldn't get the rhythmic groove to feel right. It felt stiff and predictable. It was Tom Dowd who stepped in, observing their frustration.
Right.
He told Ginger Baker to play an Indian beat.
Which fundamentally changed the architecture of the song. Standard rock music emphasizes beats 2 and 4.
Normal backbeat.
Exactly. Dowd suggested shifting the emphasis to beats 1 and 3. That tribal rolling tom-tom pattern is what gave the track its hypnotic, undeniable groove and turned it into a massive cultural hit.
And the songwriting itself is incredibly sophisticated, too. Jack Bruce partnered with the beat poet Pete Brown.
Yes, Pete Brown.
Brown famously wrote the surreal, haunting lyrics to White Room based on his own traumatic experiences overcoming substance abuse in a literal white-walled apartment near a train station.
Such a powerful image.
It is. Bruce took those evocative dark poems and wrapped them in highly complex classical jazz chord progressions.
And then you have Badge from their final album, Goodbye. That was actually co-written by George Harrison.
Oh, right, the Beatles connection.
Yeah, and the title itself is a hilarious historical accident. Harrison wrote the word bridge on the lyric sheet to mark the middle section of the song.
Okay.
But Eric Clapton read it upside down and thought it said Badge.
That is so funny.
They found it amusing, so they just kept it.
That track also features a brilliant piece of studio trickery. Clapton's lead guitar solo is run through a rotating Leslie speaker cabinet.
The Leslie speaker, right.
Yeah, it literally has a spinning horn inside it, which creates a Doppler effect, pitching the sound up as the horn spins towards you and down as it spins away. It gives the guitar this swirling, liquid, organ-like texture.
It's a beautiful sound.
So what does this all mean? Looking at the production logs and studio dynamics, it sounds like Felix Pappalardi was basically operating as the band's couples therapist.
He really was.
He was forcing them to behave, compromise, and collaborate inside the studio, while they completely reverted to acting like wild animals the second they got back on the road.
And that tension created a profound paradox between their pristine studio albums and their chaotic live albums.
Yeah.
And this raises an important point about how their music was actually delivered to the consumer's ears. Take their double album, Wheels of Fire.
Okay.
It featured 1 studio disc and 1 live disc. Back then, record labels needed stereo records to be compatible with mono AM radio stations. To achieve this, Atlantic uses a technology called the Heiko CSG process.
How does that actually work?
Well, it applied a 90-degree phase shift to one of the stereo channels. To visualize this, imagine 2 identical ocean waves colliding perfectly out of sync.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Instead of combining into a larger wave, they flatten the water completely. That is what this process did to the audio. It prevented the sound from distorting on mono broadcasts.
But wait, what about stereo?
That's the cruel irony. If you purchased that record and played it on a proper stereo system in your living room, that phase shift caused acoustic cancellation. It completely flattened the punch of Jack Bruce's bass and Ginger Baker's kick drums. The very power they fought so hard to project live was being mathematically erased by the vinyl pressing.
That is utterly tragic. The rhythm section is fighting a nightly war for volume, and the record label is scientifically erasing their low end.
Yeah, totally erasing it.
This massive divergence between Pappalardi's highly disciplined studio pop and the band's deafening, self-indulgent live volume wars, well, it created a psychological toll that finally shattered the trio.
The critical backlash hit them incredibly hard in 1968. The most devastating blow came from a young, highly perceptive critic named John Landau, writing for Rolling Stone magazine.
Right.
He reviewed a show they played at Brandeis University. Keep in mind the context here. Due to a massive storm in Indiana, the band's travel was severely delayed.
They were really late.
They didn't even take the stage until 2 a.m. They were utterly exhausted, and the performance reflected it.
And Landau's review was absolutely brutal. He explicitly called Eric Clapton a master of the blues cliche. Yeah, he attacked their extended improvisations, basically calling them aimless, repetitive, and deeply self-indulgent.
And when Clapton read that review while sitting in a restaurant, the psychological impact was profound.
It really hit him hard.
He viewed himself as a purist, a faithful servant of the blues. To be publicly exposed as a purveyor of cliches completely shattered his confidence. The stress and realization hit him so hard that he fainted right there in the restaurant.
He literally passed out.
He passed out. He realized the critic was absolutely right. They were just playing at ear-splitting volumes to mask a fundamental lack of genuine musical communication.
That realization triggered a massive paradigm shift. On July 1st, 1968, the band released their debut album, Music from Big Pink.
A legendary record.
Clapton heard this record, and it completely altered his worldview. The band's music was acoustic, it was intensely collaborative, and it focused on tight vocal harmonies and organic roots rock.
Complete opposite of Cream.
Exactly. Next to that earthy ensemble sound, Cream's incredibly loud, ego-driven, 20-minute improvisations suddenly felt totally obsolete and pretentious.
The magic was gone, so they called it quits. They played their final farewell shows at the Royal Albert Hall on November 25th and November 26, 1968.
Have you seen the footage of that?
If you watch the documentary footage of those concerts, it is chilling to witness. They are playing with this cold, mechanical detachment. They are barely making eye contact with one another across the stage. The musical marriage was completely dead, and they were just fulfilling an obligation.
Before we close out this deep dive, I want to ask you about their legacy. People constantly say Cream invented heavy metal.
Right. You hear that everywhere.
It is repeated as gospel in almost every rock documentary. But looking strictly at these historical sources and musicological breakdowns, is that actually true? Or is it just lazy rock mythology?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's largely a myth, but it is a myth built on a technological truth. The term heavy metal did first appear in rock criticism in the May 11th, 1968 issue of Rolling Stone. But from a musicological standpoint, Cream did not invent the musical DNA of heavy metal.
Because of the blues influence.
Right. Their musical language, courtesy of Baker and Bruce, was deeply rooted in jazz swing and African-American blues. True heavy metal, which was pioneered shortly after by bands like Black Sabbath, relied on something completely different.
The tritone.
Yes. Heavy metal relied on the dark tritone interval, which is often called the devil in music. It is a deeply unsettling, dissonant chord progression that creates horror movie tension.
So dark.
Combine that with very straight, driving, non-swinging rhythms, and you have metal. Cream never played with that rigid, terrifying darkness. They swung like a jazz band on steroids.
So they didn't invent the musical notes of heavy metal.
Right.
But they absolutely invented the industrial infrastructure of it.
That's the perfect way to put it.
The 100-watt Marshall stacks, the heavy valve distortion, the massive arena tours, they built the physical factory that allowed heavy metal to exist in the first place.
Precisely. They pushed the physical and electronic limits of the instruments to a point where the next generation could take that sheer, overpowering volume and apply a darker, heavier musical vocabulary to it.
If you've ever been to a massive arena rock show, or if you've ever heard a rock band prioritize a massive extended instrumental lead solo over a vocal melody, you are living in the world that Cream built.
You really are.
They proved a vital point. Constraint, specifically, the structural lack of a rhythm, guitar forces incredible innovation. They proved that intense interpersonal friction and absolute toxicity can sometimes produce pure, fleeting brilliance before it inevitably burns itself out.
They elevated the rock instrumentalist to the level of a high art virtuoso. But, they also left us with the complex, often uncomfortable legacy regarding exactly how that virtuosity was achieved and who the foundational material was borrowed from.
Which leaves you with one final thought to mull over long after this deep dive ends. Cream built their massive fortune and their virtuoso guitar god status by amplifying and extending the largely uncredited catalogs of Black American blues masters.
Exactly right.
They took acoustic Delta blues, plugged it into Tower and Marshall stacks, and sold it to stadiums. So the next time you hear a rock band taking a 20-minute, self-indulgent instrumental solo, ask yourself, are you celebrating the absolute pinnacle of individual musical expression, or are you witnessing the exact historical moment where rock music lost its collaborative, ensemble-focused soul? If you found this podcast interesting, please like and subscribe.